Every day, a tsunami of information crashes over us from the media, shaping our perception of the world. From the moment we wake up to the glow of our smartphones to the final scroll before sleep, the media landscape has become a complex ecosystem buzzing with information and opinion. Navigating this terrain can be challenging, with biases lurking in every algorithm and agendas shaping every story. In this podcast, we discuss how to decipher what the media is really telling us and how this can influence our personal finances. We will start by identifying the different types of media, discuss their unique histories, and what their modern objectives are. Media can be classified into three distinct types: the mainstream media, alternative media, and social media. Let us now delve into each of these media types in detail. We will start with mainstream media. The mainstream media are established news organizations with broad reach and influence who inform and entertain diverse audiences. These need no real introductions or examples, as you will be familiar with them. Some of them are commercial entities, while others are government-sponsored. There is a method to tell the purely commercial entities from the government-sponsored entities. Those that never show ads, such as BBC or Al Jazeera, are sponsored by their respective governments, while those that show ads tend to be commercial entities predominantly. In the examples given, the British and Qatari governments are the sponsors of BBC and Al Jazeera, respectively. Mainstream media has undergone tremendous changes over the first 2 decades of the 21st century. This change was driven by the availability of low-cost, high-speed connectivity and the availability of news and opinion on the internet. Even up to the late 90s, regardless of whether it was via radio, print, TV, or the internet, it was possible for news organizations to survive based on robust advertising revenue and stable subscription streams. This was also supplemented in a small way through syndication, where content was sold to other media outlets for rebroadcast or republication. However, today, it is no longer possible for news organizations to survive based on advertising and subscriptions. Advertising revenue has whittled away as news organizations are no longer the preeminent form of advertising. Search-based advertising and click-based advertising have more or less shifted the advertising revenues to platform companies such as Google, TikTok, and Facebook. Subscriptions have fallen off a cliff as free quality content is widely available on the internet, while those that pay subscriptions can easily share their paid-for content with others through smartphones. All this has dramatically shifted the business model of the established news organizations. Many news organizations now have sponsors that primarily fund their business operations. The point to note here is that the news organizations are now basically at the disposal of any sponsor that is able and willing to fund their business. In return for this funding, the news organization promotes any narrative that their sponsor wants to convey. Let us take an example of a developing story. A journalist may write an opinion piece on a current news event. He then has to run this by his editor and then the editorial board or editor-in-chief. It also has to be approved by the advertisers and the owners of the company. Each review will be accompanied by some changes to the original piece. By the time all these reviews are done, the opinion piece may be very different from its original form. This approach does not only apply to opinion pieces, but to reporting news events as well. This final edited version is then published, which is consumed by the public. Let us now move into the modern objectives of mainstream media. Their primary objective is to shape public discourse and the opinion of the masses. The essential narratives conveyed are determined by those that sponsor that media. In other words, their primary objective is no longer to report on events with objectivity, accuracy, and impartiality. The reason for this is that there is very little or no money to be made by reporting on events with objectivity, accuracy, and impartiality. We need to remember this fact whenever we come across any narrative. Some questions to ask ourselves are: who owns this news organization and what are they really saying? Is it true? What does this mean? And what are the implications? Even if you have convinced yourself that certain narratives are not true, pay attention to them as they make up the prevailing narrative. We now move on to alternative media. There are various definitions of alternative media, and we will not try to define it here. We will instead focus on discussing some of the prevailing characteristics of alternative media, which in their own way will describe alternative media. Alternative media offers a diverse ecosystem of voices and perspectives and tend to challenge the dominant beliefs and values of a culture. They tend to have niche audiences and focus on viewpoints underrepresented in the mainstream media. One key distinguishing feature of alternative media is the participation of the audience in the content production, either through questions or comments. Distribution of alternative media formats are through independent websites, podcasts, short and long form videos, and social media. Alternative media is not new in any way. Historically, the circulation of any material contrary to a ruling regime's narrative can be considered alternative. However, alternative media exploded over the last decade as technology and communication landscapes evolved. The point to remember about alternative media is that the barrier to entry is low. With a decent internet connection, basic website development skills, and a good podcaster's mic, you can reach large audiences. What this also indicates is that the news and views reported can range from highly accurate to totally fabricated. It is important to keep this in mind. Just as the range of truth in alternative media varies, the objective of alternative media sources also have a wide range, and you may not be able to ascertain their intentions due to the limited public information about the sources. As such, it is not possible to clearly pin down the objectives of alternative media. You may have found a specific podcast or long-form video that you enjoy and agree with. This can potentially give you deep insight into specific topics that are not discussed elsewhere. This also gives you an opportunity to interact with other like-minded listeners. However, do remember that alternative media generally tend to convey the same point of view about a certain topic, and you need to consume multiple alternative media sources to get a rounded view. We now move on to social media. Social media also needs no introduction and examples, as you are familiar with them. Social media is a fairly new concept enabled by internet technology and connectivity. Although bulletin board systems, which are text-based online communities, have been around since the 1970s, 6 Degrees, founded in 1997, is often considered the first true social networking site. It allowed users to build online profiles, connect with friends, and introduce friends to friends, which laid the groundwork for online social connections. Social media's evolution has been a whirlwind ride, transforming how we connect and share information. It continues to evolve rapidly and fragment according to demographics and popular culture. The objective of social media companies is to create revenue and profit for their shareholders. The revenues are generated primarily through advertising. As such, the social media companies focus on user engagement and growth. The most basic measure of the success of a social media platform is the time users spend on that platform compared to other social media platforms. The more time spent translates to more advertisements that can be shown to this user. Social media companies also have other sources of revenue, such as in-app purchasing and data monetization by selling user data. But advertising is their prevailing source of income. Although social media companies claim to have missions to positively influence culture and public discourse, they are primarily driven by maximizing shareholder value, and this is the dominant decision-making factor within these companies. The point to note about social media platforms is that their objective is to maximize the time users spend on their platform. As such, social media feeds you with content you agree with. Algorithms curate content based on individual preferences to generate personalized content feeds. This maximizes the likelihood of users finding something engaging and hence staying longer on the platform. This also means that you are not likely to hear viewpoints that you feel are dissenting or incorrect. In the long run, you will not be exposed to new or different viewpoints to develop yourself. It is a loop that is tightly tied to your current viewpoints, and your comments, uploads, and likes are closely monitored to adjust for any changing viewpoint you develop. We have now completed discussing the three media types. At this point, we also want to briefly touch on one further point: your personal bias. Personal bias is mostly rooted in formative experiences. Formative experiences are powerful and result in unnoticeable bias. Formative experiences do not just happen when we are young, but every time we come across a new experience class. It's hard to pin these down, especially when we interact mostly with people who have similar points of view. Personal bias is a topic that needs a full podcast on its own, so we will not delve deeper into this at this point, apart from calling out the existence of personal bias in our final understanding of a specific situation or topic. The key takeaway from this podcast is this: in any typical year, we have to make at least a few major financial decisions. This can be either fairly large purchases or decisions regarding investments in an asset class. The first place we go to further understand our potential purchase or investment is the media, and the media can be very helpful. All three media types have value. The mainstream media, the alternative media, and social media all have value. Do not discard any media type in totality. It is tempting to simply tune out the constant chatter, but ignoring the narrative playing out on the local or world stage isn't an option. With this understanding of the objectives of each media type, spend some time absorbing what all three media types are telling you about the specific topic that you are thinking of putting your money into. Consider the merits of each perspective. Do you have a friend or a family member who is an expert in this topic? Or do you have a friend or a family member who lives in the city where a specific news event occurred? Reach out to them and hear their perspectives. There are three additional points to keep in mind. Firstly, remember that most phenomenon cannot be reduced to a single cause. There are usually multiple factors or causes that contribute to an event or a cause. Secondly, remember also that some news items may have been entirely omitted by a certain media platform or company, and this does not mean that that event did not occur. Thirdly, don't get caught on the wrong side of an irreversible trend. Sometimes the majority are correct and sometimes they are wrong. Given your daily routine of work, family life, and other commitments, there is limited time you can invest into fully figuring out what is really going on. Use this limited time to develop your own point of view on what is really happening while taking into consideration the objectives of each media type. Put this together with any piece of information you have received firsthand from people you know, and you will have a more rounded view of what is really happening. Once you have this understanding, you will be better positioned to make a judgment on your purchase or investment decision. That's all for this podcast. Thank you for listening. Speak to you in the next.